The early Slavic, Antis people lived in Ukraine. The Antis were the ancestors of Ukrainians, White Croats, Severians, Eastern Polans, Drevlians, Dulabes, Ulykians, and Tivrians. Migrations from the territories of present-day Ukraine throughout the Balkans established many South Slavic nations. Northern migrations, reaching almost to Lake Ilmen, led to the emergence of the Ilmen Slavs, Kriviks, and Radomiks, the groups ancestral to the Russians. Following an Avar raid in 602 and the collapse of the Antis Union, most of these peoples survived as separate tribes until the beginning of the second millennium. 39. Golden Age of Kiev. The establishment of the Kievan Rus remains obscure and uncertain. There are at least 3 versions depending on interpretations of the chronicles. 40. In general, the state included much of present-day Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. 41. According to the primary chronicle, the Rus elite and rulers initially consisted of Varangians from Scandinavia. 42. In 882, the pagan prince Oleg, conquered Kiev from Ascod and Dir and proclaimed it as the capital of the Rus. 43. However, it also believed that the East Slavic tribes along the southern parts of the Dnieper River were already in the process of forming a state independently. 44. The furthest extent of Kievan Rus, 1054-1132. During the 10th and 11th centuries, Kievan Rus became the largest and most powerful state in Europe. 45. The Varangians later assimilated into the Slavic population and became part of the first Rus dynasty, the Rurik dynasty. 41. Kievan Rus was composed of several principalities ruled by the interrelated Rurikidnezes, princes, who often fought each other for possession of Kiev. 46. The Golden Age of Kievan Rus began with the reign of Vladimir the Great, 980-1015, who turned Rus toward Byzantine Christianity. During the reign of his son, Miroslav the Wise, 1019-1054, Kievan Rus reached the zenith of its cultural development and military power. 41. The state soon fragmented as the relative importance of regional powers rose again. After a final resurgence under the rule of Vladimir II Monomakh, 1113-1125, and his son Mstislav, 1125-1132, Kievan Rus finally disintegrated into separate principalities following Mstislav's death. 47. The 13th century Mongol invasion devastated Kievan Rus and Kiev was completely destroyed in 1240. 48. On today's Ukrainian territory, the principalities of Halych and Volodymyr-Volynski arose, and were merged into Festate of Galicia-Volhynia. 49. Daniel of Galicia, son of Roman the Great, united much of southwestern Rus including Volhynia, Galicia and the ancient capital of Kiev. He was subsequently crowned by the papal archbishop as the first king of the newly created Kingdom of Ruthenia in 1253. 50. Foreign domination. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at its maximum extent in 1619. Poland and the Polish crown exercised power over much of Ukraine since 1569 and rejected the Ukrainian call for autonomy. In 1349, Ruthenia ceased to exist as an independent entity in the aftermath of the Galicia-Volhynia Wars, with its lands partitioned between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. 51. From the mid-13th century to the late 1400s, the Republic of Genoa founded numerous colonies in the Black Sea region of modern Ukraine and transformed these into large commercial centers headed by the consul, a representative of the Republic. 52. In 1430, the region of Podolia was incorporated into Poland and Ukraine became increasingly settled by Polish colonizers. 53. In 1441 Genghis Prince Husayn I Jaray founded the Crimean Khanate on the Crimean Peninsula and the surrounding steppes. Winking Sad Smiley 54. The Khanate orchestrated Tartar slave raids and took an estimated 2 million Ruthenian slaves. 55. 56. In 1569 the Union of Lublin established the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and most of the former Ruthenian lands were transferred from Lithuania to the Crown of the Kingdom of Poland, becoming de jure Polish territory. Under the pressures of Polonization, many landed gentry of Ruthenia converted to Catholicism and joined the circles of the Polish nobility. 57. Deprived of native protectors among our youth nobility, the peasants and townspeople began turning for protection to the emerging Zaporizhian Cossacks. In the mid-17th century, a Cossack military quasi-state, the Zaporizhian host, was formed by Dnieper Cossacks and Ruthenian peasants. 58. Poland exercised little real control over this population, but found the Cossacks to be useful against the Turks and Tatars. 59. And at times the two were allies in military campaigns. 60. However, the continued harsh encirclement of Ruthenian peasantry by Polish overlords and the suppression of the Orthodox Church alienated the Cossacks. 59. The Cossacks did not shy from taking up arms against those they perceived as enemies and occupiers, including the Polish Catholic state with its local representatives. 61. Cossack Hetmanate. Hetman Bohdan Khmelnytsky established an independent Cossack state after the 1648 uprising against Poland. In 1648, Bohdan Khmelnytsky led the largest of the Cossack uprisings against the Commonwealth and the Polish king. 62. After Khmelnytsky made an entry into Kiev in 1648, where he was hailed liberator of the people from Polish captivity, he founded the Cossack Hetmanate, which existed until 1764, some sources claim until 1782. 63. After Khmelnytsky suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Berestechko in 1651, and turned to the Russian Tsar for help. In 1654, Khmelnytsky was subject to the Pereyaslav Council, forming a military and political alliance with Russia that acknowledged loyalty to the Russian monarch. In the period 1657-1686 came the ruin, a devastating 30-year war amongst Russia, Poland, the Crimean Khanate, the Ottoman Empire, and Cossacks for control of the Cossack Hetmanate. The wars escalated in intensity with hundreds of thousands of deaths. The Treaty of Perpetual Peace between Russia and Poland in 1686 divided the lands of the Cossack Hetmanate between them, reducing the portion over which Poland had claimed sovereignty. In 1686, the Metropolitanate of Kiev was annexed by the Moscow Patriarchate through a synodal letter of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople Dionysius IV, thus placing the Metropolitanate of Kiev under the authority of Moscow. In 1709, Cossack hetman Ivan Mazepar, 1639-1709, defected to Sweden against Russia in the Great Northern War, 1700-1721. 64. Eventually Tsar Peter recognized that to consolidate and modernize Russia's political and economic power it was necessary to do away with the Cossack Hetmanate as well as the Ukrainian and Cossack aspirations to autonomy. 64. Mazepar died in exile after fleeing from the Battle of Poltava, 1709, in which the Swedes and their Cossack allies suffered a catastrophic defeat. 64. Russia's victory over Charles XII of Sweden and his ally Ivan Mazepar at the Battle of Poltava, 1709, destroyed Cossack autonomy. In 1768, the Cossacks led yet another anti-Polish uprising, called Kolyevshchina, killing tens of thousands of Poles and Jews who settled Ukraine in the previous centuries. 65. Religious warfare also broke out between two Ukrainian groups. Increasing conflict between the Ruthenian Unit Church and Orthodox parishes along the newly reinforced Polish-Russian border on the Dnieper eventually led to the uprising. Faith also reflected the opposing Polish, Western Catholic, and Russian, Eastern Orthodox, political allegiances. 66. In the years 1764 to 1781, Catherine the Great incorporated much of central Ukraine into the Russian Empire when the Cossack Hetmanate and the Zaporizhian Sich were abolished. After the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 1783, the newly acquired lands, now called Novorossiya, were opened up to settlement by Russians. 67. The Tsarist autocracy established a policy of Russification, suppressing the use of the Ukrainian language and curtailing the Ukrainian national identity. 68. The western part of present-day Ukraine was subsequently split between Russia and Habsburg-ruled Austria after the fall of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in 1795. 19th and early 20th century. Polish troops entered Kyiv in May 1920 during the Polish-Soviet War. Following the Peace of Riga signed on the 18th of March 1921, Poland took control of modern-day western Ukraine while Soviets took control of eastern and central Ukraine. Beginning in the 19th century, there was migration from Ukraine to distant areas of the Russian Empire. According to the 1897 census, there were 223,000 ethnic Ukrainians in Siberia and 102,000 in Central Asia. 69. An additional 1.6 million immigrated to the east in the 10 years after the opening of the Trans-Siberian Railway in 1906. 70. Far eastern areas with an ethnic Ukrainian population became known as Green Ukraine. 71. The 19th century saw the rise of Ukrainian nationalism, particularly in Austrian Galicia under the relatively lenient rule of Habsburgs. 72. With growing urbanization and modernization, and a cultural trend toward romantic nationalism, a Ukrainian intelligentsia committed to national rebirth and social justice emerged. The serf-turned national poet Taras Shevchenko, 1814-1861, and the political theorist Mikhailo Drahomanov, 1841-1895, led the growing nationalist movement. 73. 74. Ukrainians entered World War I on the side of both the Central Powers, under Austria, and the Triple Entente, under Russia. Around 3.5 million Ukrainians fought with the Imperial Russian Army, while 250,000 fought for the Austro-Hungarian Army. 75. During the Russian Revolution and War of Independence, the short-lived Ukrainian People's Republic was proclaimed on the 23rd of June, 1917. The Bolshevik Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, or Soviet Ukraine, successively established territories in the former Russian Empire, while the West Ukrainian People's Republic and the Hutzal Republic emerged briefly in the Ukrainian lands of former Austro-Hungarian territory. 76. Following the Polish-Ukrainian War and the Polish-Soviet War, Western Ukraine was incorporated into Poland and the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was formed in lands annexed by the Bolsheviks. 1921 Peace of Riga. Modern-day Bukovina was occupied by Romania and Carpathian Ruthenia was admitted to Czechoslovakia as an autonomy. 77. In Poland, the Polish government openly propagated anti-Ukrainian sentiment and restricted rights of people who declared Ukrainian nationality and belonged to the Eastern Orthodox Church. 78. 79. In consequence, an underground Ukrainian nationalist and militant movement arose in the 1920s and 1930s, which gradually transformed into the Ukrainian military organization and later the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN. Interwar Soviet Ukraine. A starved man on the streets of Kharkiv, 1933. Collectivization of crops and their confiscation by Soviet authorities led to a major famine in Soviet Ukraine known as Holodomor. The Russian Civil War devastated the whole Russian Empire including eastern and central Ukraine. It left over 1.5 million people dead and hundreds of thousands homeless in the former Russian Empire territory. Soviet Ukraine also faced the Russian famine of 1921. Primarily affecting the Russian Volga-Ural region. 81. During the 1920s, 82, under the Ukrainization policy pursued by the national communist leadership of Mykola Skrypynyk, Soviet leadership encouraged a national renaissance in Ukrainian culture and language. Ukrainization was part of the Soviet-wide policy of Karenization, literally indigenization. Starting from the late 1920s with a centrally planned economy, Soviet Ukraine took part in an industrialization scheme which quadrupled its industrial output during the 1930s. During the early Soviet period, the Ukrainian peasantry suffered from the program of collectivization of agricultural crops. Collectivization was part of the first 5-year plan and was enforced by regular troops and the secret police known as Chko. Those who resisted were arrested and deported to gulags and work camps. As members of the collective farms were sometimes not allowed to receive any grain until unrealistic quotas were met, millions starved to death in a famine known as the Holodomor or the Great Famine, which was recognized by some countries as an act of genocide perpetrated by Joseph Stalin and other Soviet notables. 83. Largely the same groups were responsible for the mass killing operations during the Civil War, collectivization, and the Great Terror. 84. World War II. The territorial evolution of the Ukrainian SSR 1922-1954. Following the invasion of Poland in September 1939, German and Soviet troops divided the territory of Poland. Thus, Eastern Galicia and Volhynia with their Ukrainian population became part of Ukraine. For the first time in history, the nation was united. 85, 86. In 1940, the Soviets annexed Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. The Ukrainian SSR incorporated the northern and southern districts of Bessarabia, northern Bukovina, and the Hersa region. But it ceded the western part of the Moldavian Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic to the newly created Moldavian Soviet Socialist Republic. These territorial gains of the USSR were internationally recognized by the Paris Peace Treaties of 1947. Marshal Timoshenko, born in Thbujak region, commanded numerous fronts throughout the war, including the Southwestern Front east of Kyiv in 1941. German armies invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June, 1941, initiating nearly 4 years of total war. The Axis initially advanced against desperate but unsuccessful efforts of the Red Army. In the encirclement battle of Kyiv, the city was acclaimed as a hero city, because of its fierce resistance. More than 600,000 Soviet soldiers, or 1/4 of the Soviet Western Front, were killed or taken captive there, with many suffering severe mistreatment. 87, 88. Although the majority of Ukrainians fought in or alongside the Red Army and Soviet resistance, 89, in western Ukraine an independent Ukrainian insurgent army movement arose, UPA, 1942. It was created as the armed forces of the underground organization of Ukrainian nationalists, OUN. 90, 91. Both organizations, the OUN and the UPA, supported the goal of an independent Ukrainian state on the territory with a Ukrainian ethnic majority. Although this brought conflict with Nazi Germany, at times the Melnik wing of the OUN allied with Nazi forces. From mid-1943 until the end of the war, the UPA carried out massacres of ethnic Poles in the Volhynia and eastern Galicia regions, killing around 100,000 Polish civilians.